just a recap of memory, just covering everything that you should know and should have gone through for this. So if you just want to double check, this is the bit from the specification. So first of all, we started off with the 3 ways of describing memory, so the features of each store of memory. So you should be able to describe memory in terms of its capacity, duration and coding. And then in order to demonstrate that, you should describe the multi-store model of memory and identify the 3 stores: the sensory register, the short-term memory and the long-term. And again, for that, please ensure that you have research to support. So you should have a piece of research for capacity, which will be Miller or Jacobs, duration, which will be Peterson and Peterson for short-term memory, and probably Barrick for long-term memory, and encoding or coding you should have Baddeley for long and short-term memory. And then you should have some research to support the multi-store model of memory, which could be some case study, KF, HM, Clive Waring, and possibly some other experimental research like the serial position effect by Glanzer and Kunitz. Make sure that you have strengths and weaknesses of that. The order in which we did it in then, we then moved on to the working memory model. Again, ensure that you know how this improves the multi-store model of memory. Ensure that you are able to describe these 4 components: the central executive, the phonological loop, the visuospatial sketchpad and the episodic buffer, and that you are able to understand the way information is coded and the capacity. A lot of the similar research you can use for the previous model of memory, but you're going to be extending on it by looking at further research by Baddeley and Hitch. Then we moved on to long-term memory. There are 3 types of long-term memory. Ensure that you can describe and give examples of episodic, semantic and procedural. Try not to worry too much about research evidence for this at the moment, although you should have a little bit for each of those, but not as important as for the other areas of memory. Explanations for forgetting, 2 explanations: interference and retrieval failure. Make sure that you know the difference between proactive and retroactive interference and that you have some research for those. And retrieval failure due to absence of cues, so make sure you've got context dependent forgetting and state dependent forgetting and research to support those as well. Then moving on to the final bit that we've just looked at, factors affecting the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Make sure that you can explain what eyewitness testimony is and why it's useful and what it's used for. Misleading information, including leading questions, so you're going to need a piece of research there that's probably going to be Elizabeth Loftus, which is the car crash and post-event discussion, possibly looking at research by Gabbert. And then finally, the effects of anxiety, or the factor of anxiety and how that would affect an eyewitness. And for that, you would look at Julian Cutshall and Johnson and Scott. And then finally, looking at the cognitive interview, I've given you the original journal article by Fisher and Gieselman, maybe some research by Elizabeth Loftus, and having a look at how that can improve eyewitness testimony. I've uploaded these, but it would be an idea now if you could possibly fill in as many of these as possible. If you don't have this, please email me and I'll make sure that you have a copy of this. But this basically is a good way of if you can do this on A3 sheets, if you've got any A3 sheets, to fill this in. So obviously you've got your A01 description here, and you've got the supporting research, which can also be used as A01 or as A03, and then your evaluation here. And similarly for the multi-store model, if you want to draw it here, that's fine. Just make sure that you name all the components and remember to always name how it works, and make sure that you've got strengths and weaknesses. Again, the same for the multi-store model, for the working memory model. And this is because AQA often provide a diagram like this and ask you to fill it in. So just make sure that you can name those components. In terms of these here, they don't have to be in any order, but usually when you're filling this in, the episodic buffer does go in the middle because it draws information together. But it doesn't matter which side you put the phonological loop or the visuospatial sketchpad on. Again, for this in the description it might be that you give an example of those as well. And for evaluative points, please bring in the case study of Clive Waring here, because Clive Waring clearly had elements of his episodic memory but no current. He had some semantic memory, and he largely maintained a lot of his procedural memory. Again, note down which bits he did maintain and which bits he didn't. Interference theory, make sure that you have pro and retroactive in here. A little bit of research, and the criticisms, remember, can be of the theory or can be of the research, but if you're going to give criticisms of the research, be sure to link back as to how they therefore strengthen or weaken the theory. And again, for retrieval failure, make sure you've got context and state-dependent forgetting. You might want to create 2 sheets here for this, where you do one for state and one for context. And here we've got a lot on misleading information. Leading questions, again, your main researchers are going to be Loftus and Palmer. And if you want to just discuss post-event discussion, I would bring in Yulian and Cutshall there for that as well. A little bit on eyewitness testimony for anxiety. Again, remember in the PowerPoint and the video we looked at a negative effect, which would be Johnson and Scott, and a positive effect, which would be Yulian and Cutshall. So please make sure that you've got those 2 comparison studies. And the cognitive interview, again, remember you've got the 4 techniques. Give an example of how you would use that and the reason that that would be used. A little bit of supporting research, which can be the original article by Fisher and Gieselman. Criticisms of it, remember that it's probably not always used in its entirety. A couple of questions here. Again, mainly used for revision purposes, but if there's anything here that you're not sure about, particularly the 16-mark question, always very useful to have a go at. I have actually used this question in your exam questions for this week. Any queries on this, please email me and I'll get back to you ASAP.